World War I was one of the darkest chapters in human history. Just brutal. But right in the middle of all that darkness, there was this brief, almost impossible moment of peace. That's the story we're diving into today, the Christmas Truce of 1914. I mean, think about it. We're in the middle of the deadliest war the world had ever seen. And the question is, could a simple song, a Christmas carol, actually stop the fighting? Could it really bring sworn enemies together? It sounds like something out of a movie, but it really happened. And that's the incredible story we're exploring. So to really get why this moment was just so unbelievable, you have to picture what these soldiers were going through. We need to set the scene. Okay, so the year is 1914. The war that everyone thought would be over by Christmas has ground to a horrifying halt. All across Europe, you've got this massive, static front, just miles and miles of trenches, and millions of men are trapped in this absolute nightmare of mud and cold and death. Just try to imagine it for a second. It's a bitterly cold winter night. Snow is falling, covering up the scarred earth. And in these trenches, on both sides, you have these soldiers who are just exhausted, completely bone-weary. And it's not just from the fighting, right? It's the relentless cold, the mud that never goes away, and this feeling of utter hopelessness. The war had become this bloody, pointless stalemate. And it's right there in this bleak, totally hopeless setting that something completely unexpected happens. Something that honestly changes everything, even if it's just for a little while. All of a sudden, drifting across that deadly strip of land they called no man's land, a sound cuts through the freezing air. And it wasn't gunfire. It wasn't an explosion. It was a sound that had absolutely no business being on a battlefield. It was singing from the German trenches, a sound that was both completely familiar and totally out of place, Christmas carols. You have to imagine being a British soldier, huddled in the freezing dark, and hearing that. It must have felt surreal, like a dream. So after a moment of just total disbelief, the British soldiers did something incredible. They answered back. They started singing their own carols across the battlefield. It was this defiant harmony, not of weapons, but of human voices reaching out across that deadly void. But what happened next? Well, that's the real heart of the story, because the singing, that was just the start of it. Slowly, tentatively, soldiers started to climb out of their trenches. Can you even imagine that? They met in that desolate space between the lines. Not as enemies, but just as fellow human beings. They were shaking hands. They were sharing cigarettes and what little food they had. And then, incredibly, in some places, a football appeared out of nowhere and a game broke out, right there in no man's land. They even worked together to bury their dead and recover the wounded with dignity. So for one night, just one magical night, they weren't soldiers anymore. They were just men, finding this moment of shared humanity and probably the most inhuman place on Earth. But this was still a war. And as you can probably guess, this unbelievable, unauthorized moment of peace, it wasn't going to be allowed to last. Because when the dawn came, so did the cold, hard reality of their situation. The truce, as beautiful as it was really just a temporary act of defiance against the giant machine of war. The next day, the orders came down from high command. The war was to resume. Think about that. The very same men who had just been sharing songs and shaking hands were now being forced to see each other as targets again. This fragile peace was shattered, not by the men themselves, but by orders from generals miles away from the front lines. And it all happened so fast. Christmas Eve, the singing starts. Christmas Day, they're meeting like friends, playing football. By the day after, Boxing Day, they were enemies again. It was just this fleeting moment of peace, completely swallowed up by the war. And yet, the story lived on. It wasn't forgotten. And why? Because what it represents is just so powerful, isn't it? It's proof that even in the most horrible circumstances imaginable, our shared humanity can find a way to break through. It really shows that the will to connect with each other can sometimes be stronger than the orders to hate. So, in the end, what does this Christmas truce really tell us? Is it a glimpse of our better selves? A reminder that deep down, we're more alike than we are different? Or was it just a beautiful, fleeting exception to the brutal reality of war? That's something to really think about.